This is probably the most reproduced painting on Earth, printed on mugs, umbrellas, phone cases, dorm room posters. Nobody actually knows who the woman in it is, and the man who painted it never married her, or anyone else, even though his last words were reportedly her name. This is the kiss, painted between 1907 and 1908 by the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt, now hanging in the Belvedere Museum in Vienna. It wasn't even called the kiss at first. When Klimt debuted it at the 1908 Kunstschau exhibition in Vienna, it was titled Liebespaar, simply Lovers, Car, Wati, Wate. The painting was an instant sensation. The Austrian government bought it for 25,000 crowns, an enormous sum for a living Austrian artist, while the exhibition was still running. Here's the part almost nobody mentions. It wasn't even finished yet. Klimt kept reworking the composition for another year before actually delivering it. Early photographs show the couple's legs were shorter, and the flower meadow beneath them was far more elaborate than what survives today. Look closely at the woman's face, eyes closed, completely lost in the moment. For over a century, people have assumed they know exactly who she is. They don't. The leading candidate is Emily Floge, a fashion designer and Klimt's closest companion for more than 20 years. But there is no written record confirming it. Other historians point instead to Adele Bloch-Bauer, whose famous portrait Klimt had just finished around the same time, or a recurring model nicknamed Red Hilda, or even the composer Alma. The most reproduced face in art history, and nobody can definitively tell you whose face it actually is. Klimt himself makes this even stranger, because he was, by every account, a deeply complicated man to love. He never married, not once, but he's alleged to have fathered as many as 14 children. Only 6 are officially documented, born to 3 different women, none of whom he married, and none of whom he ever lived with. And through all of it, one relationship stayed constant: Emily Floge, inseparable from him since 1897. Viennese society simply assumed she was his mistress. Some scholars now argue the relationship may have stayed entirely platonic genuinely. Nobody is certain. She wasn't just his companion. Either she was a genuinely successful businesswoman in her own right. In 1904, Emily and her 2 sisters opened a fashion house in Vienna called Schwestern Floge, designing progressive, reform dresses that rejected the corset entirely. At its peak, the salon employed around 80 seamstresses and assistants, and Klimt himself sometimes designed the fabric patterns they used. They never had children together. They never lived under the same roof. And yet, by most accounts, Klimt's last words, as he lay dying, were simply, "Get Emily, he, Artamasa." The gold covering nearly this entire canvas isn't just decoration. It's the signature of what art historians call Klimt's golden period. He found it on a trip to Ravenna, Italy, in 1903, standing inside the Basilica of San Vitale in front of Byzantine mosaics that were already more than 1,300 years old. Gold wasn't a foreign material to him, even before that trip, though. His father, Ernst Klimt the Elder, worked his entire life as a gold engraver, and one of Gustav's own brothers followed the same trade. He grew up around the material years, before he ever turned it into fine art. Look at the patterns dressing the 2 figures. The man is built from sharp black rectangles, hard, structured, upright. The woman is wrapped in soft circles and flowers round. Yielding, organic. Klimt built an entire visual language of gender into 2 blankets of gold leaf. Some more recent scholarship pushes that reading even further. A number of art historians have pointed out that the small concentric red circles scattered across the woman's robe closely resemble something else, entirely under a microscope: red blood cells. Nobody can prove Klimt intended it, but it's a striking coincidence for a man this obsessed with pattern and precision. But gold wasn't always safe for Klimt. Years before the kiss, it nearly ended his public career completely. In 1894, the University of Vienna commissioned him to paint 3 enormous ceiling allegories for its great hall, philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. When he unveiled them, professors and critics attacked the paintings as pornographic, degenerate, an insult to the university itself. They were never hung in the hall. They were made for. Klimt did something almost unheard of. He bought the paintings back with his own money and swore he would never accept another public commission again. He kept that promise. Everything after, including the kiss, was painted for private buyers, not institutions. Those 3 rejected masterpieces didn't just disappear into storage. What happened to them is genuinely tragic. They eventually became part of a private collection owned by the leader of family until 1938, when Nazi forces seized them, because the leaders were Jewish. In 1945, with Soviet troops closing in, the paintings were being stored at Immendorf Castle, north of Vienna. On May 8th, retreating SS units reportedly set the castle on fire, rather than let the art fall into enemy hands. All 3 ceiling paintings were destroyed. Nothing survives of them today, except a handful of black and white photographs and sketches. Decades later, a Belvedere curator named Franz Smoler teamed up with Google's Arts and Culture Lab to try to recover their color. Digitally, they trained an algorithm on nearly 92,000 paintings, then narrowed it to Klimt's own surviving work, and combed through old exhibition catalogues and letters for physical descriptions. One review mentioned golden snakes woven through hair in jurisprudence. The team cross-referenced that against a Klimt frieze from the same year to guess the exact shade of gold. Nobody alive has ever actually seen these paintings in colour. What exists now is an educated algorithm, assisted guess the closest anyone will likely ever get again. So look at this gold canvas one more time. 2 figures wrapped together. Faces we've memorized without ever really knowing. A painting sold before it was finished, under a title it doesn't even carry anymore. A woman whose identity has never been settled. A man who fathered over a dozen children and married none of them, yet died, asking for the one companion he never made a wife. A visual language of gold, born in a 1300-year-old church, used to dress 2 lovers, and a decade earlier to nearly end his career. The 3 paintings that almost destroyed his reputation no longer exist anywhere, except in memory and a few surviving photographs. The painting that made him immortal is reproduced, quite literally, more than almost anything else humans have ever made. And the Nazi looting that destroyed the faculty paintings wasn't an isolated incident. One of the women considered a candidate for the face in this very kiss, Adele Bloch-Bauer, had her own famous Klimt portrait stolen by the Nazis in 1938. It hung in Vienna for decades under a deliberately vague name, Woman in Gold, to hide that its subject had been Jewish. Her niece spent years fighting to get it back, and finally won in 2006, selling it for $135 million, a world record for a painting at the time. Klimt spent his career being either censored or worshipped for the same instinct, covering the truth in gold and trusting us to feel it anyway.